Welcome back to Wellness with Delaney. I'm with Zane Griggs today. He is the author of Kicking Ass After 50. He's a fitness and weight loss coach, and we are going to give you guys so many tips to either start your fitness journey or continue it well into your life so that you can have longevity of your health span. Zane, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Delaney. I appreciate the conversation today. You're talking about all my favorite subjects.
Likewise, I'm so excited. Okay, so big question.
Mhm.
Why are people struggling to get and stay fit into their 40s and 50s?
Well, there's a few factors involved in that. Age is certainly one of them. We can certainly tolerate a lot more stress, a lot more environmental stress, toxins, bad diet, those bad sleep when we're younger because we have so much growth hormone. Our sex hormones are surging, in their 20s and even in our 30s, and those play a big role in our body's ability to recover, to fight inflammation, to overcome any of those things I mentioned, which all create oxidative stress. And so our body is much better at overcoming oxidative stress when we're younger, because of primarily because of those hormones. Where you're just younger, right? It's just better. It's easier to do more with less recovery. And then as we get into 40s and 50s, those hormones start to diminish naturally, leading to not a reduction of growth hormone, but also a reduction of sex hormones. We all know for men, it's called andropause. For women, it's menopause. And those hormones are really responsible for how we regenerate tissue, how our metabolism, they're connected to our metabolism, our immune system, our recovery. And so it's just part of the aging process. We can't handle as much oxidative stress, and that oxidative stress starts to overwhelm our immune system. And we begin, what we see now, the onset of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. Those are factors coming in through, yes, environmental factors, but our body's ability to resist them as we get older gets weakened. And so you start seeing these things snowballing, and you add to that, that's when many people's career or parent life, if they have a family, begins to get pretty crazy too. And the more stress, more demands. And so all of those stressors add up. And the environmental stress, the personal stress, career stress, all of that adds up and takes a toll. And I think that's where we have to learn to honor where our bodies are at the moment. Stop trying to treat ourselves like we did when we were 20s and 30s, and start thinking a smarter strategy, not a harder strategy. Not trying to diet harder, not trying to necessarily kick our own butts and work out harder, and not. It's really about being a little wiser in our strategy and paying more attention to what we put in our mouth, how we exercise, how we manage our stress, our sleep. That was a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the big picture.
Yeah. So, and I love this too because last year I read the book Smarter Not Harder by Dave Asprey, and it
Mm.
really did shift my paradigm a lot in the way I operate, and really just trying to do like the smallest things possible to move the needle as much as possible, right? And like
Mm.
looking at efficiency. So, if you see somebody who's like 40 or 50 or beyond and they're training how they did when they were 25, 30, like is there room for that, or is it a completely different strategy?
I would generally say it is a different strategy in looking at minimal effective dose. The majority of my clients are between 40 and 65. That's just who I work with. I'm 54. And so I speak from experience, 27 years as a trainer. I've made a lot of these mistakes before they have, and run into my own issues with overtraining, underfueling, over leveraging things like fasting, low carb, under fueling for the amount of workout I was doing. And so I've learned from experience. I've looked up the data and say, oh, okay, that's why the data matches with the patterns. And so the strategy does shift into a more, I like minimal effective dose with the intense stuff like strength training or sprinting, minimal effective dose. And then with cardio, I advise polarizing cardio. So stay either high end with a little bit of sprinting, not much, little, and then a lot more time in the lower end, the zone 1 and zone 2, where we can really maximize fat burning. But it's not just about the fat burning. It's the fact that we're building more mitochondria for our cells, which are our energy supply. in our type 1 fiber, in the muscle fibers and in the energy system that powers us throughout our day. So when we're doing the intense stuff, we have certain muscle fibers that are great for strength, power, speed, size. And then we have other fibers that are made for just getting us through our day and for cardio, that steady state cardio, that low end cardio that's more fat burning driven, that uses more mitochondria. And it's that lower end of our cardio zone that we can do a lot of without creating a lot of inflammation, without impairing our recovery, without causing us to be super hungry 3 or 4 hours later, or be exhausted 3 or 4 hours later. And so it's staying out of that middle range of the cardio generally and polarizing. So the very bottom, the very top, and then a little bit of strength training, and some mobility as you get older, like work on other things like that falls in the lower end with the mobility, the yoga, playing pickleball, Pilates, leisurely stuff, fun stuff that isn't so intense and demanding, but it gets you moving. That's where we want to spend most of our time.
Okay. And then with that, like zone 1 and zone 2, are you recommending like tons of hot girl walking for your clients? Do you have like a steps goal for them?
Not really a step school. I try to help them find things that they will want to do. So there's some walking for sure you get in just as like I know it can at least get this much, and you can schedule it. There's some stuff you might be doing with your family, or things that are leisure, or a class you can take. Again, go do the Pilates class or the yoga class. That's going to get your heart rate in that same zone. It doesn't have to be a particular activity. If you want to swim, if you want to get a stationary bike while you're watching TV, find little ways to get that in there. But I mean, a step school, or like you say, I'm going to get, if that's your way to track it and that means something to you, and you can take your calls or listen to podcasts while you're doing that, and it helps you stay up, by all means do that. But find your thing so you can be consistent, because this is where you want to spend the majority of your active time. And it could be broken up into different things, but whatever it is, it needs to be something that you don't dread, and you need to find a way to make it appealing to yourself, either through variety or some other engagement with other people. But that would be one way to do it. But it's really just thinking about how do I stay moving, and that could be either from, like I said before, taking work calls while you're moving, go out for a walk and take your calls, or if you're taking your kids to the park, if you're a parent and you find a way to stay engaged with them, or find a way to lap around, look for places in your schedule where you can just move, and you'll hit that zone. It doesn't take a lot of work.
I love that so much. Okay, so you said you're 54 and you're obviously in like really good shape. Is it possible for the average person once they hit 50 to be shredded?
Well, it depends on how much work they put in before that. So I think if you you better start taking care of your health by the time you're 40. You better start paying attention to this. Otherwise, you could be incurring, it's not that you can't turn things around, but you could be incurring some damage. You have a lot more damage control to handle if you're waiting till after 40. It's just harder to turn a few things around as opposed to when you're in your 30s. You can do it. I see people do it all the time. I have a lot of associates and friends that are in their 50s and even 60 that look amazing and perform amazing. They're not just, it's not about just the aesthetic, but they're actually, much help. Their metabolic health is great. They're performing, they're competing at something that they enjoy. And they're just an amazing physical condition compared to what we see as your average 50-year-old. And I think that what I love to see that is the paradigm is shifting, and people are seeing it's possible, and they're starting to take their health in their own hands. And that's what I really encourage people to do, is be your own advocate for your health. If you wait until your doctor tells you there's a problem and he's got to write a script or a procedure for you, yeah, you're in trouble. You've waited too long to really prevent. And now you're again in damage control. You've got to reverse, and it's better to get some eyes on certain biomarkers, blood work, take a real good look at yourself, personal assessment, and say, I can do better if that's what needs to happen. It's definitely possible, but how long you wait to get there, it's going to determine how much work it takes.
Absolutely. No, that makes total sense. So for somebody who's listening who's like in their 20s, so I'm 27 and a lot of my audience is like 20s and 30s, what can we be doing now at this age to ensure that we are healthy into our 50s?
We'll start by building muscle, right? Make sure your workout is about, and I don't mean bodybuilding, but put on spend time to at least 2 or 3 days a week adding muscle, which means you're not afraid to put on muscle, right? You're not afraid of, oh, I'm going to get bulky. Probably not. You're probably not, unless you're taking some extra, special supplement to make that happen. And so add muscle all over your body. Build your cardio base. Spend time in that zone 1, zone 2 range to build that cardiovascular base, because that's going to build those mitochondria, the mitochondrial density, which is your powerhouse. It's your energy system. And spend a little time sprinting, and then really clean up your diet. I mean, processed food is, to me, clearly the primary toxin driving what we see as metabolic disease today. Those diseases, those symptoms of disease I mentioned earlier, they're all tied together. They're all driven by the metabolic, or by the oxidative stress, creating metabolic stress in our bodies, which is making it difficult for us to manage our blood sugar. And then that drives more hunger. It drives more cravings. It raises our insulin level, making it difficult to burn fat. And it all starts with the quality of your diet. We didn't have these problems with metabolic disease 120 years ago, but now metabolic disease and the medical costs associated with metabolic disease are higher than our national defense budget.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And that's not an exaggeration. That's true.
Wow.
It's like the primary cost in the United States is our healthcare addressing metabolic disease, because now it's the number 1, number 2, number 3 killers. It's like heart disease, cancer, diabetes. These are the things that are taking people out, taking them out of their careers. They're taking them away from their family. They're putting them in hospitals. And eventually they're leading to these diseases that give us, in my opinion, an early death, and really sickness in those last few years is when we should be really enjoying, those golden years of our life. And so I would say, clean up your diet. A whole food diet doesn't have to be perfect, but eat whole foods. Move often, build some muscle. Those are, those are the 3 pillars to focus on.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned, like, you're probably not gonna get bulky if you put on muscle. Like, people are really surprised by me a lot. So I'm 5'2", I'm like 120 pounds, and I lift really heavy. So, like, when I'm hip thrusting, it might be like 300 something pounds. I think 320 is my PR. And
That's
people will be
amazing.
like, "Thank you." They're like, "How are you so small? Like, how are you so tiny, but you're lifting heavy?" I'm like, "Because as a woman, I'm not taking anything. Like, I'm
Right.
eating a lot of protein. I'm eating beef every day, but."
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's like, if I'm not taking anything to get big. It's very hard for women to get huge unless you're literally like on supplements to grow and get huge and bulk.
Right.
And I think that's such a myth for women. And I think I've seen, because a lot of the women like in their 40s and their 50s and even like upper 30s really grew up in like the almond mom culture. They're really scared. You know what I mean? They're scared to put
Yes.
on muscle. Like,
Yeah.
what do you say to these women that are literally terrified to pick up a weight?
I tell them that they're sacrificing their bone health and their metabolic health in their future. And if they want to, they got, the risk is you end up being what's called skinny fat, right? Or TOFI, which is thin outside, fat inside, meaning you may be thinner, smaller, but your body composition is not what you want it to be. It has more fat and less muscle that is going to give you kind of a thin but soft look. If you want a firm look, you start building that muscle, or it's going to atrophy. As you get older, the testosterone starts coming down in women, often long before menopause. Your testosterone starts decreasing late 30s, early 40s. And I don't mean it's gone, but it starts to diminish right around there for women. And testosterone, understand, ladies, you have 10 times more testosterone in your body than you do estrogen at any point in your cycle. Testosterone is the dominant hormone in all humans. Your testosterone is going to help you solidify those muscles, right? So keep an eye on that, but understand that muscle is your glucose sink. It's where your body can put sugar, blood sugar, and store it, as opposed to storing when it has nowhere to put it. Like if it doesn't have muscle to fill with that glucose, it's going to convert it to fat and store it in your fat cells, right? That's where your metabolism comes from. That's where your energy is derived, is in those mitochondria in your muscle cells. And again, stability as you get older, osteoporosis is a major concern for women, but it also is impacting your neurodegenerative health, your neuro. So basically, there are these little myokines, essentially, that are released when you work out from muscles, and they go all over the body, stimulating basically mitochondrial health. So, but one of them in particular is called BDNF, and it goes to the brain and stimulates neuroplasticity in your hippocampus. So it's actually, when you work out, you actually release these little chemicals that go to your brain and stimulate regeneration. And so it's your heart health, it's your bone health, and it's your brain health.
I love that. It's more than just what you're looking like. I mean,
Yes.
I think looking your healthiest indicates that things are
Yeah.
probably going well in your body, but it's more than that. So we have talked a little bit about metabolism today. You've brought it up a few times, so I'd love to dig into it. I think a lot of people hear the word metabolism and they think it's all about how I burn calories. It's like calories in, calories out. I have a slow metabolism, I have a fast one. So what really is the metabolism, and what is the role that it plays in overall fitness?
That's a big question. And I'll try not to make it confusing. So metabolism, most people do not have they think they have a slow metabolism. It really isn't that the metabolism is slow. It's just that much of your energy is being stored as fat, and that perhaps your fat isn't being released for more energy. And that's going to stimulate hunger, which means you're eating more often, you're snacking, and you're usually going for really energy dense foods. So it's where your body is, how your body is using the energy, not how much you're burning. Now, you can improve that with strength training, but essentially your metabolism is how efficiently those mitochondria I mentioned are taking in fuel and turning that into energy versus storing it as fat. And so energy, meaning chemical energy, which is ATP, which is what our muscles use to really burn out. That's what we turn either carbohydrates or fat into. And when that is disrupted by what's called insulin resistance, which means your body isn't responding to insulin's role to move glucose into the muscle cells. And so it starts storing them as fat cells, and the insulin will block your body's ability to access your fat cells, which is what creates that hunger and that desire to snack all the time. Because if you can't access fat, your energy has to come from somewhere. So your metabolism doesn't change much. It's what's going on in your body around your insulin levels. So it's very important to get eyes on, start doing blood. If you're struggling with your weight or struggling with your health, and you feel like you're low energy, we need to get eyes on your fasting insulin. Now, unfortunately, most doctors do not add this to your metabolic panel, to your blood panel. A lot of them don't even know how to read it. It's a shame, because it's a very good preventative marker. If you start getting, if your insulin can start going up in the background long before your blood sugar does, 5 or 10 years before. And so if you get eyes on this marker and see that it's out of range, you can say, oh, wait a minute, I need to make some changes long before your doc wants to write a prescription for something to control your blood sugar. But again, they don't have a drug to impact insulin levels directly. And so it's not on your blood work. But being your own advocate for your health, you need to put that on there from a prevention standpoint, and try to be in a range from 2 to 5 where your insulin is low, which means that your body doesn't have to work that hard to basically move to manage your blood sugar. When insulin is high, you're going to be storing a lot more fat than you want to be. When your insulin is low, your fasting insulin is low, then you're going to be able to burn more fat and use more fat for energy, because it's going to be accessible. Your body fat is going to be more accessible. That makes all the difference in the world, because that's when your body fat is accessible. Then going 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours between meals without snacking is not a problem. Making good decisions about your food because you're not voracious when you get in front of it, trying to shove everything you can in your face because you're just so hungry isn't such a problem. You actually have control of your hunger hormones. They're much more balanced. And
Mm.
so it impacts your really your relationship with food. And it impacts your body, your ability again to access that body fat and have that energy even when you haven't eaten for several hours. And so it's a misconception that the metabolism is high or low. There are some fluctuations there. That's usually not the primary issue.
Okay. So then if somebody, let's say they do have high insulin and they come
Yeah.
to you, like what would be some of, I know you're not a doctor, but like just as a coach, like what would be some of your favorite hacks or tricks to just support insulin levels?
Yeah. So most doctors won't be able to tell you how because they didn't
Yeah.
learn about nutrition in school. They didn't learn about
Hmm.
nutrition and they don't know why. They'll tell you to eat less and move more. That's their
Yeah.
advice. We've heard that advice for decades. It's not working. The processed food, without getting too complex about this, the processed food, which is made up primarily of processed, what are called vegetable oils or seed oils. You've probably heard seed oils mentioned on social media and the news lately, which is kind of crazy. I didn't think I'd hear it in the news for at least another 10 years, but seed
Mhm.
oils, processed grains, processed sugars, and some processed vegetable-based protein powders are what makes up processed food. When we okay, here we go. Trying to explain this without getting too sciencey, but processed food has been taken out of its food matrix where it was stable and where it had antioxidants in with it, right? It was a stable state. When you remove that processed food, especially the oils, these seed oils, they leave behind one, the stable environment they were in, and two, the antioxidants that are built in to that food, which keep those oils and sugars and proteins stable from oxidizing. Okay. Oxidation is like basically like rust. Okay. It's decay. And so those, especially the oils in particular, keep oxidizing even after you've extracted them from the food. When they're in the bottle or in the food, they continue to oxidize. And then when we put them in our bodies, we metabolize them. That's an oxidative process. We're literally burning them with oxygen to make energy. And so all of that creates a certain level of oxidative stress. When we're eating whole food, again, we have the antioxidants that come in the food with the food, right? In the food matrix, and that those ingredients are stable in that whole food. So they haven't begun to oxidize quite like a processed food has. And so our bodies can manage that low level of oxidative stress. But when we're eating a lot of processed food, the average American diet is about 60 to 65% processed food. And so we're eating all of this processed food. It creates a lot of oxidative stress. At some point, that overwhelms our antioxidant supply. And so that creates what are called free radicals. Most people have heard of free radicals. These free radicals get out of control because we can't control the oxidative stress. And those free radicals, what can happen is a free radical cascade. Though basically, those little guys are running around stealing electrons from other fat molecules, sugar, carbohydrate molecules, proteins, and they're oxidizing them. They're stealing those electrons, and that creates a free radical cascade, which can create new free radicals at a rate of about 1 billion per second. So that's why it's so important for us to have that oxidative stress under normal metabolism under control. Because when that gets out of control, you've got a cascade of inflammatory reaction we're called reactive oxygen species, ROS, creating inflammation throughout, and they're impacting everything they touch, from the food that you've eaten to the tissues in your body. You've got inflammation out of control. That's the beginning of disease. This is what also creates within the mitochondria, which is where we turn food into energy. That oxidative stress causes mitochondria to shut down, which creates a reaction with the blood sugar of elevating insulin and then elevating blood sugar. As a response to the low energy, our body responds by making higher blood sugar, which then raises our insulin. So it's this oxidative stress that leads to the insulin resistance, which then leads to us overeating, storing too much fat. It's not the getting fat and overeating that comes first. Most of us wouldn't do that if we didn't have the insulin resistance from the oxidative stress. The oxidative stress comes first, raising blood sugar, raising insulin levels, which leads to all of our response, which leads to overeating and over fat storage and no fat access. So if you got elevated blood sugar and you got elevated insulin, you're going to be hungry, you're going to have low energy, be tired, and you're not going to be able to access fat. So what a combination for putting on weight, for creating diabetes, for creating heart disease. You're building more visceral fat. So it's important to understand that you've got to get healthy in order to lose weight. You've got to reverse that process. And it begins with cleaning up your diet, getting rid of the processed food or minimizing it to less than 10% of your diet at least. And I think specifically getting rid of those seed oils as much as you can. You wouldn't think they make up that much of our diet, but the statistic is the seed oils alone in the processed food make up 30% of the average American diet calories and about 80% of our fat. So everyone's worried about the fat they're eating in red meat or in some kind of animal products or their eggs or their cheese. We have 80% of our fat in our diet is coming from these oils because of the amount of processed food the average American is eating. That's the driver of disease. And that is a new occurrence that just happened in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So we've just created processed food since the 1910s, 1920s. And it's just grown ever since. And after the 1970s, it was like a skyrocket. And that's when our disease began. A lot of people don't understand that in 1901, our obesity rate in this country was 1%. Type 2 diabetes only impacted about a fraction. In fact, even in the 1930s, just 100 years ago, it only impacted about 1/3%. Heart disease was so rare, most doctors never saw a heart attack, heard of heart disease, dealt with heart disease as early as 1912, 1920, right in there. These are new diseases we have created on the level that we're seeing them. Before, they were such rare occurrences before that it can't come. We can't blame ancient food for a new disease. We can't blame the meat we've always eaten, the rice we've always eaten, the fruit, the honey, we've eaten grains even historically. We may have created them. We may have made sourdough with them or processed them differently, but we have created this disease with our diet. And now at this point, we've exported that to the rest of the world, and we can see it happening since the 70s and 80s. That as we started exporting our processed food, countries that had no history of disease, like Japan and Australia, and it's growing in those countries as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up. And I'm glad that as a trainer, you are so versed in this because in general, I tend to be pretty wary of interviewing trainers because a lot of the ones I talk to, it's like they're eating, they're promoting these like seed oil protein bars and proteins full of gums and energy drinks. And it's all about macros. And I'm like, I just don't think we're going to connect here, And so, and for context for you, I like have this running joke on my page about like the seed oil mafia. And that comes from, I don't know if you probably have heard the story of like in Italy, the mafia controls the olive oil production that's exported.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so like a lot of the olive oils cut with seed oils. And so when I started sharing like my way of eating, which is like heavy on the grass-fed steak, heavy on the butter, like just a lot, like I'm not concerned about fat at all, right? But I'm not eating seed oils. Everything I'm eating is like unprocessed, ancestral, whatever. And people were coming for me. And it's like this mob-like mentality. Oh yeah. Everyone thinks it's genetic, the reason I'm not fat, which is funny because I used to be fat. Like I used not huge, but like I was overweight when I was younger and I was eating the like classic hippie bowl, like processed healthy diet that every doctor recommends. And I couldn't lose weight. And so I call it like the seed oil mafia because it reminds me of that story and like the mob-like mentality when you come for people's processed foods. But I'm so glad you mentioned it. And like, I just recently learned that seed oils actually like stay in your fat tissue for 4 years. So
yeah, the half-life is about 600 days. So if you didn't take in any more seed oils than the same, they did a study about 2009. They showed the average American's seed oil, the percentage of their body fat that was made of these particular types of fats and seed oils makes about 21% of their fat. Well, but if you go back to like say 1850, 1880, right in there, not that long ago, the percentage they would make up in our body fat is about 3 to 5%. So we've multiplied the amount of these fats in our diet because they came in through whole food at that point, and they weren't a problem. They weren't oxidized. So because they make up 30% of our calories, now they make up about 20 to 30% of our body fat, which is causing the inflammation that I mentioned in the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really even call myself a trainer. Is kind of like, I started off as a trainer 27 years ago. At this point, I'm more of a health coach. So I look at all these things with nutrition, with recovery and sleep. I look at blood work with them. I help them talk to their doctor about things like hormone replacement therapy. When is it time for that? What would the ideal ranges be for that? Or what the ideal ranges for their fasting insulin? Because again, the doctors don't know, which peptides would be helpful to them. So how can they take a holistic view and understand that all of those elements are important, starting with the diet, exercise, and sleep, and then layering on those integrative strategies on top, because you can't out-hack the foundations. You can't out-hack your diet, your movement, or your lack of recovery, or if you have bad sleep. You cannot hack. You got to get those nailed, at least down to 80% effectiveness, and then layer those other things on. But at your age, it's all about those foundations. It's all about just focus on those foundations of nutrition, like what you're doing with the whole food. It's amazing when you try to tell people, tell them they have to give up their precious processed food. There's often an emotional response, which is what you're experiencing. And there are people say, I would rather stick to eating my whatever fast food of their favorite fast food, like literally from a certain, like whether it's a McDonald's or an Arby's, whatever it is, they'd rather have that than their health.
Oh, yeah. Well, even beyond fast food, like go to Trader Joe's, look at the ingredients on these foods that
True.
are labeled as like health foods. And that's the
Yeah,
thing, it's like it's the green goddess dressings. It's all these bowls and
for
salad bowls
sure.
that you're getting everywhere. And like I think people don't
Organic.
realize, yeah,
Yeah.
it's all greenwashed. Like people need to actually stop and read the labels, because people will try to tell you their food is, I mean, I'll even see like organic cold pressed canola oil. I'm like, it's still canola oil. Like I'm still not eating it. No, thank you. But nice try.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so hard. I feel for the people who actually are really genuinely trying to be healthy, and they're buying these like healthy labeled foods and they're not
Yeah.
healthy. And that comes down to buy your own raw ingredients and cook it yourself. That's the only way to really guarantee what goes into it. So I'd love to touch on diet with you.
Sure.
So I know you promote a whole foods diet in general. Do you track macros, or are you pretty intuitive?
I have tracked macros, and now I kind of like, and I might go back to it just to get myself like, hey, where am I sitting now? But I tracked them at one point because I knew I made changes when I kind of hit that wall where I was overtraining and under fueling, doing a lot of intermittent fasting and fasted workouts, and very on the low carb side. And while training hard, it was too much metabolic stress. And so, okay, something's got to change. I want to know when I'm changing it, what works. So I weighed, measured, tracked it in an app for about 10 months and really trying to find that sweet spot for me. May not be the sweet spot for 30% of the population, but it works for me. And so, yeah, I did track them for a time to see where my ideal was for my level of activity. And when I found that, I did my blood work again. I found that my fasting insulin had dropped slightly. My fasting insulin was always pretty low. But my blood glucose actually dropped. I think it's the reduction of stress. My blood sugar dropped from, say, 90, typically in the low to mid 90s, down to 79, which is ideal. And it was like I'm eating more carbohydrates, not less, but it was whole food. There was nothing, which tells me it's not glucose that's causing disease. It's the seed oils and the processed food in general. Probably some impact from processed sugar as well, from maybe some glyphosate in there. There's all sorts of environmental factors. My conclusion was that it's not a macronutrient that's causing disease. There's not a macronutrient that's causing people to have diabetes or be obese or having heart disease, because we've always eaten as humans all the macronutrients. We have historical reference of cultures all over the world eating different amounts depending on what's available, but it was all whole food and we didn't have disease. We only had disease since the processed food. And so it's not a particular carb or a fat or a protein that's causing disease. There's processed food that fits under each of those. There's macronutrients represented in the processed food, of course, but it's not. We can't blame all macronutrients because or all carbohydrates or all fats because the ones in the processed food are the ones causing disease. So it doesn't make all fats bad or all carbs bad or all proteins bad, obviously. And so once I realized that, I'm like, okay, so all of these macronutrients have a role in my body. The carbs, the fat, and the protein all have a role. And how much of them I need depends on the role that I need for my activity level, for my body, what I need right now. And my age is certainly a factor. And so I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
But I'll get to it. But it's not. We're blaming macronutrients, and what it comes down to is oxidative stress caused by those foods. Just like cigarettes cause oxidative stress, so they cause heart disease and cancer, right? Poisons cause oxidative stress, they hurt you. Glyphosate, oxidative stress, which leads to the cancers. It begins with oxidative stress, which overwhelms our immune system, and it gets out of control. The inflammation gets out of control, and we have disease. So if it causes oxidative stress more than what we should be able to handle, then it's a problem. Exercise causes a little bit of oxidative stress. We heal, we adapt. Can you overdo exercise? Can you overtrain? Definitely. But when it's in the right window, it's adaptive, it's positive. Every metabolic function of food causes a little bit of oxidative stress. It's when it's overwhelmed by these toxins that really don't belong in our body, that would compare it to pollution, compare it to like anything I mentioned, that we know these things are bad for us. Why are they bad for us? Because they all cause oxidative stress. And so chasing down a particular food group and blaming that food group is kind of silly, because the food group isn't the root cause. The root cause, when we really get down to it on a cellular level, it's oxidative stress. And that's why you can eat a little bit of ice cream now and then, or a little bit of chocolate here and there. But 90% of your diet is whole food, you don't have a problem.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and like there's also with like good treats these days, so many options of like making it yourself, or even like I saw there's an ice cream now that I can't get it here in Washington, but it's literally like cream, egg yolks, and raw honey. That's the only thing. I'm like, wait, I can make that at home. And it's a superfood. Like that's a superfood. You have your fat, you have your healthy cholesterol, you have raw honey and all the benefits from that. So this summer I want to buy Ninja Creamy and start making my own ice cream with like raw cream, raw egg yolks, and just raw honey. And then you can eat it as much as you want, honestly. Like it's so good for you. So then with that, I know protein is a really hot topic now. I'm seeing numbers thrown out there. Like how do you recommend somebody finds their ideal range of protein for a day?
So the simplest recommendation that seems to apply positively to most people is 0.8 grams to 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. So if you're right around the weight you want to be, use 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. If you need to lose 50 pounds, choose the weight or choose the amount, use the number of the weight you feel like is ideal for you, and use that number. If you weigh 300 pounds, you don't want to be 300 pounds, you don't need 300 grams of protein. If you know your ideal weight is 220, use 220, or your ideal weight is 150, use 150. But it's 0.8 to 1 gram. So that's pretty simple math for most people. What's hard is changing habits sometimes to get there. And trying to do that in 1 or 2 meals a day for most people is almost impossible unless you just really like gorging in one meal. To me, I don't enjoy that. So for most people who are especially if you're trying to drop weight or maintain your weight, in 3 meals, you should be able to get at least 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're around 150, that's going to be 120 grams of protein, which you can hit in 3 meals with 40 grams of protein in each meal. Mm-hmm. That is not unattainable. If you're not used to it, give yourself 3 or 4 weeks to slowly add protein in each meal and stack your way up to it. But the majority of people can eat 40 grams of protein in 3 meals.
Oh yeah. All you need is like a good steak, and then it's 40 grams.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, find the meat of your choice, weigh it, figure out, okay, I know there's 6 grams of protein per ounce. If it's cooked, it's at 6 ounces. Get a little scale, little digital scale. Oh, I know what that looks like now. I know what size that is now. I know how that looks on my plate. There's your marker. You don't have to be, super food prep, weighing, measuring every single meal, but it might be beneficial to track that stuff for a week or two till you get eyes on it and you see what that looks like. And then,
Mm-hmm.
intuitively, like, oh, I know I need this much meat or these eggs with this meat 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I've hit it. And then everything else is like secondary because that's usually the hardest thing to hit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I think it's a simple way to quantify your needs with that little window. And I know for some people it sounds like a lot, but your body will adjust your stomach acid. If you haven't eaten meat for a while, you've been more on the plant-based side, it may take some time for your stomach acid to catch up, but it will adapt. Your stomach acid is made to break down meat. If you haven't used it much, you do lose it, but it will come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes it simple. It is nice too, because like it can be scary at first to try to measure everything, try to feel like this is my life now, but you really do become intuitive because most people eat somewhat the same things on a regular basis. So you
Correct.
you learn your like tools, you learn your general foods, and then you can always adapt and adjust. What is the importance of 30 grams of protein per meal? Is that a real thing for the muscle synthesis?
Yes, muscle protein synthesis and that's 30 grams of animal protein. If you're looking at, let's say you're using a plant protein, which I'm not recommending, but let's say if that's your majority of the protein coming in, you would have to almost double that amount. And what it comes down to is there's 3 specific uh, amino acids that are responsible for stimulating the muscle protein synthesis that you mentioned, which is basically it's an alert to your body that, oh, there's enough protein on board. Let's go do some repair work. Let's go reinforce lean mass with this protein. So when you've eaten enough protein, so that 30 grams, give or take, of animal protein gives you enough of those few amino acids, which might add up to, in that 30 grams, they may make up, 5 or 6 grams there, maybe even 3 or 4. But it's just enough of those that your body's like, okay, here's the repair signal. So it creates a repair signal. Your body let's go shore up some of these proteins that are starting to get old, wear down. Maybe they've got something, some repair needed, and we can bolster this muscle tissue. When you don't eat enough, and then now kids are different. When they're growing, they get enough of that stimulus. They don't really have to hit that. It's really after we've stopped growing, we get into 18 and up, essentially, give or take, that we need to start thinking about that portion size being important. And then as you get older, there is some speculation that might need to go up slightly, maybe 5 or 10 grams per meal. It's a little fuzzy, but they might need a little more to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis. There just might be like over 60.
Mm.
There might be a little more need to raise that a little bit, just to kind of compensate for a slower or limited absorption of the proteins, which is part of age. But for most people, the 30 grams is ample. If you get 30 grams per meal, you're going to get a stimulation of muscle protein synthesis at each of those meals.
Super important to know because I know even especially women, I think men are different and there's like this stigma around women's diets that just really grinds my gears. It's kale smoothies every day and like
Oh,
no one's just eating eggs or steak or chicken. Like, you know what I mean? Just these really simple foods. And so like, okay, if you're a woman and you're grinding in the gym and they come home and they're like maybe eating some hummus to refuel. I'm calling out my mom on this one, honestly. This is her. She's eating some
look out.
hummus and she's like, I had my protein. I'm like, there's like 2 grams in this, mom.
Yeah,
And it's not bioavailable because it's a plant-based protein. And so it's really important for people to realize like it's so important to get those animal-based proteins in for all those amino acids. I mean, it's so
right.
much more bioavailable. It's incredible. And so like my heart's so for the women who have been like really put in this box of like suffer in the gym, suffer
Yeah.
in the kitchen, don't eat protein, don't eat these foods that are manly, they'll make you look manly. And I'm like, it's so not true. So I love that you're speaking on this.
It's a reduction. It's a reductionist concept of, and as I said, especially with women, especially with like someone your mom's age, you're not here to reduce muscle. You want to maximize muscle growth, and that's going to help you with your actual goals, actually hit those goals. The other thing about plant protein just doesn't have the amino acid profile. So like I said, you need to eat twice as much of it. Well, what's going to come along with twice as much protein of plant protein? They're all carbohydrates, right? So you got to have more food in general you have to eat in order to hit that amount. So more calories, more carbs if you're eating whole food. But they don't have enough of those specific amino acids that we're talking about, the leucine, the isoleucine, the valine, that stimulate the muscle protein synthesis. And so it's just not the same protein. You can't compare the two proteins. They don't have the same level of amino acids. And so or in their same order, you'd have to do some fancy food combination, to get all of those of a mix of plants. And so it's real simple. Meat is really, because we're made of meat, we are animals. We have animal protein. And so since protein is our structural source primarily, that's what we need to eat, because what you put in your mouth to feed yourself is to replace what's in your body, right? And so spinach you're not replacing any form of structure or energy in your body with a spinach, right? I'm not telling you, it's not to poo-poo spinach, but don't count on that kind of food for replacing your structure, or a chickpea like in a hummus, or almonds or anything. We do not have plant cells. We don't have plant cell walls. We have animal membranes. We have animal fat. We have animal muscle tissue. That's what we need. That's what we need to eat to replace that tissue. That's what we're doing with that. You're not going to put. You're not going to fix your car with brick and mortar. It's a completely different, or clay, right? You got to use metal. You got, So it's like using a different tissue or different building blocks than what's in your body, right? You minimize everything down. It comes down to carbon, right? But we're not that. It's not that simple. We replace like for like, the tissue for tissue, and that's what's going to. There's room for a little wiggle room, but by and large, we're looking to replace our body's tissue with something as similar as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad we touched on this too. I think it's so important. Okay, so I really want to touch on hormones, because I know that a really big struggle for people getting and staying fit into their 40s, 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
beyond is obviously like your hormones are going down eventually, go through menopause.
Yeah.
For the women, and then for men as well, like you're losing testosterone. And
Yeah.
so I know it can be a struggle. Actually, even for younger people these days, we're seeing obviously like really low rates of testosterone for men in their 20s. We're seeing really low rates of progesterone for women in general, but also low testosterone, like a lot of really high estrogen because of all, the xenoestrogens and the toxins and seed oils and all of this. So with all of that, I think it can be really scary, and it can be like swimming upstream trying to get in shape, right? Do
Absolutely.
you recommend HRT as a method of like improving hormone optimization for fitness?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Like majority of my clients are on some form of hormone replacement therapy, but again, my target audience, my typical client base is between 40 and 65. So in that age where a certain amount of lifestyle changes isn't going to impact that. It's an age-related thing. There's a little bit of lifestyle of impact, but at that point it becomes age. And so it's age-appropriate hormone replacement therapy. For someone who's in their 20s or 30s, there's a lot of lifestyle that's impacting that at that point. It's not unheard of for someone to have some sort of, like for men, it's called hypogonadism, which means they just have a low T, and that's an odd thing. That's an unusual thing, and that is often treated with testosterone. For some women, there's something going on that limits their progesterone production, or their thyroid, or their estrogen. And so there are those occasions, but many of what we're seeing, that the move that you're talking about that's changing, that's so unusual from 30, 40, 50 years ago, is environmental, in my opinion. And it's coming in through diet, could be coming in through plastics, could be coming in through other toxins in our environment, like all the glyphosate. It could be the that's on everybody's yard in all of our food, golf courses. I mean, it's we have some environmental toxins that could be lowering testosterone in some people and not really impacting others. But we're seeing a large part of the population with lower testosterone. So ideally, when you're in that younger age group, look for the environmental factor first. Start trying to eliminate those. Clean up your diet. Get rid of the plant-based proteins, the soy, the processed food in general. Lift heavy weights. Get plenty of sleep. Right? Don't stay up till 2:00 watching Netflix. Like, get some sleep. All of those things impact your hormones and your recovery. So fix your environment as much as possible, and stress level includes stress level. Then at that point, there may be some peptides that can help stimulate your production of, for instance, testosterone. There's HCG, which is one. Kisspeptin, which is another one that can stimulate some in another route, more longer route than the HCG, but it stimulates the production of the other hormones, which stimulate more testosterone. So there's other ways of addressing it other than going straight to a hormone replacement that might get your body going again. I've seen a lot of women turn their hormones around, their hormone cycle around, just with diet and some exercise.
Yeah.
Like go from unable, like you said, PCOS, unable to get pregnant, irregular periods, to everything's back on track. They're feeling great, hormones in balance by changing their diet, or a lot of them going from vegetarian to an omnivorous diet, and getting more and doing the other little things like honoring your sleep, getting more sunlight, moving, lifting. But a lot of it does stem from diet. And so, when we have I guess to answer your question, it depends on the person, where they are age-wise, what the environmental factors are, and how much of an impact those environmental factors are having. For younger people, a lot of times it can be corrected by changing their lifestyle habits. As we get older, we got to do lifestyle habits, and if they choose to, hormone replacement as well, and it can be a game changer. You're talking about, can I address this directly? So there was a study called the Women's Health Initiative that took place in the 90s, which up until that point, hormone replacement was a common thing that most doctors were trained on. Women would be getting it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we hit the 90s. Women's Health Initiative announcement comes out, all the news, on all the morning talk shows, and they're saying, oh no, hormone replacement therapy for women causes an increased rate of breast cancer. Well, we take a closer look. What they show, there's two major issues with it. First, they said it had a 24% increase in the incidence of breast cancer. When there was no increase in mortality, no increase in death, it was an incidence. They say 24%, that's the relative risk, which means relative to what it was before. In reality, it was something like, instead of 3 women out of 1,000 had an incidence of breast cancer, which was the norm, with hormone replacement, it was 4 women out of 1,000. So 1 extra woman out of 1,000 had an incidence of breast cancer. Again, not mortality, not death, an incidence. So it was really an increase, 1 out of 1,000, but they call it 24% because from 3 to 4, that's a 20% increase, 24%, 25% increase. But it's the way they decided to communicate it to create a scare. The other problem was, from what I understand, the control group, which was supposed to not have had any, that they were compared to, didn't have any hormone replacement. And they're saying they're the ones with the 3, and the people with hormone replacement had the 4 women out of 1,000. There were women in that placebo group who had actually had hormone replacement in the past. They just weren't currently on hormone replacement. And so that completely throws out that you have an accurate or a true control group, right? That really makes a control group not really a control group. It invalidates the control. And so you really had an invalid study that has set back not only women's health for at least 30 years, a whole generation of women who are now in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are were scared away from hormone replacement. You also have a generation of doctors who were no longer trained on it. So now we have doctors coming back and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to prescribe it. They don't know how to identify it. They don't know how to manage it. Yeah. They'll try to put them on some sort of antidepressant.
Yeah.
They'll put you on an antidepressant instead of just replacing your hormones, which is what we have decades of history going back to the 60s of doing.
Yeah. And it's crazy because this has like already been redacted, yet the damage is done. And so there are people who are still afraid of HRT, even though like estrogen is insanely heart protective and heart disease is a leading cause of mortality.
Mental. So what's protective for women is what's going out, especially, first of all, they removed the black box warning on testosterone, which was a warning against saying it caused heart disease. They just removed that in the last couple of months, finally, even though we show that testosterone replacement alone improves the benefits, resistance to heart disease and insulin resistance. But with women's hormones, with the estrogen and progesterone, bone density, neuroprotective, so against neurodegenerative diseases and heart disease, as you mentioned. 3 big ones for women as they get older: bones, heart, and brain. It should be like standard. Like every general practitioner should know how to do this, recognize it. But no, we'll send you to the urologist, and the urologist puts you, for the most part, unfortunately, oh, you just need an antidepressant. You just need something to, it's all in your head. Forget about the fact that their body is falling apart.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. My naturopath always says, like, we don't have a Xanax deficiency. We have a hormone deficiency. And like, I think there's a lot of fear for women too, when it comes to like certain cancers with hormones. And actually a lot of the studies have been the synthetic hormones and birth control, not the bioidentical hormones that you're going to get in HRT, like pellets. And so there's like, people don't really understand that the hormones, like the progestin that you're getting and like the synthetic estrogen that you're going to get when you're taking birth control is far from the hormones that you're getting when you're doing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which is extremely protective.
Correct. Yeah. So, but we have no problem handing out birth control to 14-year-olds until they're like all the way to for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. Okay, so while I have you, before we run out of time, I would love to touch on some strategies for working out. Can you run me through like what would a general workout split look like for somebody in their 40s and 50s that you would recommend?
40s and 50s. Okay, so here's the concept, and I'll lay it out for you. You want, these hardcore boot camps, blasting things out. You can withstand that in your 20s and 30s, and maybe it makes it a quick impact. But as you get older, you're really setting yourself up for inflammation, injury, lots of hunger, lots of maybe some disturbed sleep, and increased cortisol, and you've already got a stressful life. So what you want ideally is a minimal effective dose of the strength training. So just enough to stimulate growth, but not so much that you're spending, that takes so much to recover from, and that you're sore all the time and you're worn out and you can't do the other activities that are necessary because you're tired or you're overeating to compensate. So what my primary recommendation for people, depending on what you want to do, what you're focused on, whether you really want to build or you're just trying to like hang on to some muscle, is either a 2-day split, so an upper body, lower body split, hitting everything twice a week, or, and this is going to sound a little odd, a full body workout 3 times a week, which is what I'm doing right now. And I've split between the two. This is what the old school bodybuilders back in, I mean, old school, not 70s. I mean, like the 20s, 30s, and 40s before steroids entered the scene in the 50s. This is how they worked out, because they did just enough to stimulate growth and they hit frequency. And we have current studies showing that it's frequency that improves the growth of muscle more so than these huge high volume workouts that hit that muscle once a week. So less volume, fewer sets, more frequency. So 2 or 3 times a week with fewer sets in each workout. Because really it takes, if you think of let's see, if we could put the stimulus for muscle growth into a unit, let's say 1 unit of muscle growth, you can accomplish that 1 unit with your first working set. So you take a set to within 1 or 2 reps of failure, or go all the way to failure if you choose. But within 1 or 2 reps of failure, accomplish it, you can stimulate that 1 unit of muscle growth stimulation. It takes 5 more sets to get 2 units. In other words, the same amount of stimulation that you get in one, you have to do 5 more to get 2.
Wow.
So you get a diminishing amount of stimulation for those particular muscle fibers with each consecutive set because of fatigue to the nervous system, energy fatigue, your cardiovascular fatigue, all of these things take a toll on those muscle fibers. So working a full body, you're hitting a little bit of everything. You're getting maybe, 80%, or really you're getting that 1 unit of muscle stimulation. Maybe you're doing 2 or 3 different exercises for a muscle group. Like for instance, I do 3 or 4 push, 3 or 4 pulling, and 3 or 4 legs, give or take. And that's my workout. And I choose what those are. If you're doing upper body, lower body, it might be 3 or 4 push and pull on one day and maybe 5 or 6 legs on the second day, and then you take a break. And on my 3 days a week, there's at least 48 hours between each workout to give time. But with that small amount of sets, you can recover in 48 hours. If you're doing 10, 15, 20 sets on a muscle group and blasting it out, it can take you 4 or 5 days for your body to really recover from that inflammation, especially in your 40s and 50s. And by that time, so basically you got to wait a whole week to work that muscle again, unless you're overlapping your inflammation. And so that the small sets, more frequency, is where I think is a sweet spot to get the growth without the inflammation. So basically you get more benefit and less risk. And that's what it comes down to. Maximize the benefit, minimize the risk. That's not saying you won't get benefit doing it the other way. It's just that from what I've seen and what I've experienced personally, there's more benefit and less risk with this particular approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Smarter, not harder. Okay, so do you work out 3 days a week?
I hit for strength training,
Okay.
right? Yeah, for this, we're talking about strength training, the split. Doesn't mean that's all I ever do. I mean, I'll do mobility stuff almost every day, stretching, movement,
Okay.
trying to move into different ranges. Might throw in a sprint here and there, whether it's a salt bike, if I can't get outside in the winter, or sprint on some grass once or twice a week.
Okay.
And then I do a lot of that low level I mentioned. Well, almost I want to get that daily, whether it's a walk around the neighborhood, or if it's rainy again, just get on a spin bike or a bike and just go low level pedal, keeping that zone 2. Could be, like I said, the Pilates, the mobility work, anything that's active, playing pickleball with your friends, anything that's active in that low level range, do that as often as possible, daily, because that's kind of how we're meant to move. We're meant to always be in sun and moving on a regular basis throughout the day. And for most of us, our lifestyle it's not conducive to that. We have to really carve out time for it. But for the strength training, that's what I target. For most people, like minimize, just enough to stimulate growth and strength, but allow for the recovery and allow for energy and the recovery for all the other activity that you really need to fit in. So you're not just, all of your energy and recovery isn't taken up by one particular modality.
Yeah. I like this approach a lot too, because I think, and even like at my age, I actually backed down to lifting 3 days a week. I do Pilates, I walk every
Good.
day, like I'm doing all these other things, but I used to lift 6 days a week and I was so puffy and I felt like I actually really wasn't seeing gains and I wasn't getting the results that I wanted. Like I really wasn't seeing the muscle tone. Like I was strong, but I felt so inflamed and I like wanted abs, right? And I wanted these gains that I wasn't getting. I went down to 3 days a week and I feel like I'm actually able to work so much harder in
Yes.
my lift, and B, like the weight just falls off. And I think that really terrifies people, this idea of like less is more with strategic,
Yeah.
intentional, plan in place. And they have this idea that they have to lift every single day. Like, what does it do to the body when you overtrain?
You raise cortisol levels and you do create inflammation. It does limit your progress in most cases, unless you're doing some sort of extra, you're on some sort of PED of some kind, some performance enhancement. But you might find yourself getting weaker. You're definitely more run down. It could disturb your sleep. It could lower your thyroid. because your body's like, hey, you're overdoing it. We can't keep up. Let's start reducing energy to conserve, trying to conserve your energy. But really, you just feel run down. Your body might be burning all the time. You're not making progress. It's amazing you figured that out so young. I wish I had figured it out when I was your age. It would have saved me a lot of trouble and energy and time. And but it's that inflammatory response our body has to recover from before we can really come back and hit it hard again. Because if you think about these muscle fibers, you don't grow whole muscle. You work specific muscle fibers within that muscle that are meant to move that in that intense way. And if those muscle fibers are still inflamed or even damaged from your workout, they're not going to perform. They're going to turn around and perform the next day, right? They're still damaged. And so they're not, if they can't, why are you trying to work them again? So minimal damage, like there was so much emphasis put on damage and the burn back through the 80s and 90s. It's like, why do we want to create muscle damage? That creates your immune system to come back and repair that muscle fiber before it can be used again. And it doesn't repair it bigger. It just repairs it back to the way it was before, right? So it's kind of like I tell people, if you wreck your Honda, right, then you take it to the body shop, they're not going to build it back into a Porsche, right? No, they remodel it back to the Honda. Your structure doesn't change when you damage, but it takes longer time to be able to use it again. Mm-hmm. So minimize damage, minimize unnecessary fatigue when you're talking about building strength and muscle fiber, and just stimulate that muscle protein synthesis that make the body bring more protein into that muscle fiber. So how you know that's happening is something called mechanical tension. And you have these proteins each other when you work out within the muscle fiber, these actin and myosin, these proteins. And if you probably noticed when you get towards the end of a set, you get close to failure, there's this involuntary slowing of the reps. Like you're pushing as hard as you can, but it gets a 6. Ooh, it's slowing down 7. Oh, I'm pushing as hard as I can. But for some reason it's slowing down. That's mechanical tension. That's actually the process that's stimulating more protein to come back in there. So those proteins, instead of being like this, they're starting to slow down. And as they slow down across each other from your fatigue, they're building these bridges across them. And it's the building those bridges that stimulates that growth. So as long as you're getting in usually the last 4 to 6 reps before failure, where everything is involuntarily slowing down, that's where you're stimulating the protein, more proteins come back into the muscle fiber and add muscle fibers. You don't have to go all the way to failure. Failure can often cause a lot of inflammation. If you go to within 1 or 2 reps, if you feel like, okay, I'm going to fail at 10, I'm going to stop at 8, you're in a sweet spot where you're getting that mechanical tension, but you're minimizing the inflammation you have and damage you have to recover from. So 1 or 2 reps before, it's called reps in reserve. So you go to 1 or 2 RIR, reps in reserve, of a set, you're getting that sweet spot without the inflammation you don't want.
Amazing. The formula is simple, right? But people, they complicate.
It's been confused. Yeah, it's been confused by bodybuilder style and all these magazines and magazines when I was a kid, social media. I mean, all of this stuff that's coming, all the writing about in the bodybuilder social media, that is one, supplemented many times by some level of steroid use, and 2, it's just sometimes you got somebody writing who's just either looking at old data or they're from old school thought process and they haven't really caught up with what's happening. And sometimes they might be writing and they're not really a doer. They might even practice this stuff. They're just a writer regurgitating something they did research on, and they're just writing a new article with old research.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where it's important to look at people who are staying at the forefront, people who are living it. I think people will see from your page too, like you're insanely shredded. And so if you are making it work, that's I love looking at people. It's like you judge the tree by the fruit, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important to do that. It's important to look at people who are really living it as well as preaching it. Okay, so before I let you go, I love to ask everyone, what is your wellness goal?
My wellness goal? Right now, I'm really working on improving my mobility. So doing like I'm spending more time on that than probably anything else. So getting the hips and the spine just to move better. If you've ever seen anything like animal flow, there's things like that where I want to be able to move fluidly on not on the ground, right? I'm able to get back where I'm more comfortable bridge, doing a back bridge, and the hips have more mobility, and the chair is just killing us all,
Mhm.
right? But I'm spending a lot of time improving my mobility so I can move in a way that most people can't in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, because I think that's where we really have a vulnerability as we age.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so important. Mobility is so underrated and such a
Mhm.
huge part of fitness, but also just overall health and like injury prevention and all the things, no matter what your age, but especially as we get older.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where can people find you? Where can they find your book? Can you plug all the things?
Sure. I think what would be helpful is I've got kind of a short, free little plan. That's kind of like this is what I would take my clients through, but it's like the short version. It's just a few pages. It's called free40plan.com. So the word free and then 40plan.com. Like this, the URL says it's free. So, and that'll take you nutrition, movement, some recovery, and even the integrative strategies. If you're in that, over 40 group and you start looking at blood work, like what you're looking at, what's the ideal ranges, how to address hormone replacement. There's a little bit of that in there. So free 40 plan, you get a free download. I'm at Zane Griggs Fitness on Instagram. That's where I'm probably most active. At Zane Griggs on YouTube, plenty of long form content there. But it's all on my website, which is zanegriggs.com. You can find all my socials on one spot there if you're looking for anything else.
Amazing. And I'll make sure to link that all in the show notes, you guys. So if you want to check him out, which I highly recommend, you can do that really easily as well. Zane, thank you so much for joining me. This was such an illuminating conversation, and I know it's going to help so many people.
Thank you, Delaney. I'm happy to do it. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
thanks so much. Well, you guys, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. As always, please make sure to give us a 5-star review if you love this and spread the word. Tag Zane, tag myself as you share this episode to your stories. And let's get the word out there and help people get fit AF. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will chat soon.